January 26, 1945, 1400 hours. Holtzwihr, France. A Browning M2 50 caliber machine gun mounted on a burning M10 tank destroyer is about to become the last line of defense between 19 men and annihilation. The gun weighs 84 pounds, fires 550 rounds per minute at a muzzle velocity of 2,910 feet per second, and sits exposed on a vehicle that's currently on fire with 90mm ammunition stored in racks just 6 feet below the turret ring. Any moment now, those shells will cook off and turn the entire M10 into shrapnel, moving at 3,000 feet per second in all directions. Standing behind that gun is Second Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy, 19 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, 112 pounds soaking wet, a sharecropper's son from Kingston, Texas, who dropped out of school in 5th grade to pick cotton and hunt rabbits to feed his 11 siblings. In the next 60 minutes, he will kill more than 50 German soldiers, direct artillery fire that destroys 3 Panzer tanks, hold off 250 advancing enemy infantry, and earn the Medal of Honor by doing something that every tactical manual and every ounce of common sense says is categorically suicidal. The cold is biblical, the kind of January cold that turns your breath to ice crystals and makes your bones ache just from existing. The temperature is 18 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that the M10's crew abandoned it, wearing their gloves because touching bare metal with bare skin would leave flesh stuck to the steel. The ground is frozen solid to a depth of 14 inches, which means digging foxholes is impossible, and also means that every artillery shell that impacts detonates on the surface instead of burrowing in, sending shrapnel in flat trajectories that maximize casualties. The tree line behind Murphy's position, the WWII forest, is 300 yards back, naked winter trees providing concealment, but zero protection from the German 80mm guns that have been hammering the position for the last 45 minutes. Between Murphy's command post and the forest is open ground, a snow-covered field with absolutely no cover except 3 shallow depressions that used to be irrigation ditches but are now just frozen mud barely 2 feet deep. This is where Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, is supposed to hold against the German 2nd Mountain Division's counterattack. Supposed to hold with 19 men, 19 out of the 128 who started this offensive 3 weeks ago. Murphy stands in one of those shallow ditches, field telephone pressed to his ear with his left hand, M1 carbine in his right hand, watching 6 German Panzer IV tanks roll out of Holtzwihr 800 yards to the east, like mechanical predators hunting wounded prey. Behind the tanks, spread in a skirmish line across 400 yards of frozen farmland, come the infantry. Murphy counts them through his field glasses, grouping them by squads, estimating numbers the way he estimated rabbits in a field back in Texas, before deciding whether to waste ammunition on the shot. 250 men, maybe more, all wearing white winter camouflage that makes them nearly invisible against the snow until they move. They're moving now, advancing at a steady walk, rifles at the ready, spacing good, discipline excellent. These aren't the teenage conscripts or old men that Germany's been throwing at the Western Front lately. These are professionals, mountain troops who've been fighting since Stalingrad, who know their business and have come to do it efficiently. They're coming to take this position, to push through to the main road, to cut off the 3rd Division's advance, and maybe turn this whole sector of the Colmar pocket into a killing ground for isolated American units. The 2 M10 tank destroyers that were supposed to be Company B's armor support sit 100 yards apart on either side of the dirt road that runs from Holtzwihr toward the Bois de Riedwihr. The rear M10 took an 80mm shell through the engine compartment 11 minutes ago, killed the driver and gunner instantly, sent the commander and loader running for the tree line with their uniforms on fire. The surviving crew is back there now, somewhere in the forest, being treated for burns by medics who don't have enough morphine or bandages or warm blankets for the casualties they've already got. The forward M10, the one closest to Murphy's position, tried to maneuver for a better firing angle 6 minutes ago and slid into a drainage ditch. Now it sits at a 23-degree angle with its main gun pointed uselessly at the sky, and its commander screaming into his radio for a recovery vehicle that isn't coming, because there are no recovery vehicles available within 10 miles. The crew is still inside, still trying to work the gun, still pretending they're contributing something other than being a stationary target for German gunners, who are bracketing their position with increasing accuracy. Murphy's radio crackles with Lieutenant Colonel Michael Paulick's voice, tinny and distorted by static and distance. Paulick commands 1st Battalion from a command post 2,000 yards behind the line, close enough to get shelled, but far enough back to maintain communications and coordinate the bigger picture. Murphy, this is 6. What's your status? Over. Murphy presses the transmit button, keeps his voice level despite the fact that his status is approximately 5 minutes away from catastrophic. 6. This is Bravo 6. Enemy armor and infantry advancing from Holtzwihr. Estimate 6 tanks, 250 personnel, both friendly TDs ineffective, requesting artillery fire, coordinates to follow. Over. A pause on the other end, 2 seconds that feel like 10. Murphy can hear Paulick doing the math, calculating whether it's worth expending limited artillery ammunition on a position that might be overrun anyway, deciding whether to order Murphy to withdraw now and save the 19 men, or hold and maybe buy time for the rest of the battalion to consolidate. Bravo 6-6, hold your position, artillery support approved, fire when ready, reinforcements inbound, but ETA 45 minutes minimum. Can you hold? Over. Murphy looks at the advancing Germans, now 700 yards out, and closing steadily. He looks at his 19 men scattered in shallow depressions across 200 yards of frozen mud, kids from Michigan and Georgia and Oregon who've been fighting for 3 weeks straight on reduced rations and inadequate winter gear. He looks at the burning rear M10, black smoke boiling into the grey January sky like a funeral pyre. He looks at the forward M10, stuck and useless, its crew probably going to die in the next 10 minutes when a German 88 finds the range. He does the math that every combat officer has to do, the arithmetic of bodies versus mission versus time. 6, Bravo 6, affirmative, we can hold, out. It's not a lie exactly, it's a statement of intent that may or may not align with reality, depending on variables Murphy can't control and enemy actions he can't predict. He hangs up the field telephone on the infantry pack, set sitting in the mud beside him, and starts calling in artillery coordinates, reading map references to the fire direction center while keeping his binoculars trained on the advancing Germans. The first volley lands 100 yards long, white phosphorus shells that detonate in the snow with flat cracks and send up clouds of burning chemical smoke. Murphy adjusts fire, brings it down 100 yards, watches the second volley land in the middle of the German infantry line. Men disappear in explosions of snow and fire. The line wavers but doesn't break, doesn't retreat, just keeps coming with that steady professional advance that says these soldiers have been shelled before and survived it and know that the only way through an artillery barrage is forward, always forward, because backward just means dying slowly in the open. The Panzer IVs keep coming too, impervious to artillery designed for personnel, their 75mm guns traversing to track the American positions. Murphy watches a German tank gunner line up on the stuck M10, watches the muzzle flash, watches the tracer round arc across 600 yards in maybe 2 seconds. The shell hits the M10's turret with a sound like God slamming a church door, punches through the armor, detonates inside. The turret hatch blows open and black smoke pours out. No one exits. The crew is dead, cooked or blown apart, or both. The Germans are 500 yards out now, close enough that Murphy can see individual faces through his binoculars, close enough that his M1 carbine would be effective if he wanted to waste ammunition on individual targets instead of directing the artillery that's doing actual damage. One of the Panzers fires at the forward American position, the shell impacting 30 yards from Murphy's ditch and throwing frozen mud and snow into the air. Shrapnel whistles overhead, that distinctive whining sound that Murphy has learned to categorize by pitch and trajectory, determining in a fraction of a second whether it's going to hit him or sail past. This one sails past, embeds itself in a tree somewhere behind him. He keeps calling artillery fire, walking the rounds across the German line, killing soldiers in clusters of 3 and 4, slowing the advance, but not stopping it, because stopping a professional infantry assault with artillery alone is nearly impossible. You can make them pay for every yard, but you can't make them quit unless you kill every single one of them, and Murphy doesn't have enough artillery ammunition for that, even if he had unlimited time. At 400 yards, the forward M10 takes another hit, this one in the engine deck. The diesel fuel ignites with a whooshing roar that turns the back half of the vehicle into a blast furnace. The crew starts bailing out, 3 men in various stages of burning, running toward the tree line, while German machine gun fire kicks up snow around their feet. 2 of them make it to cover. The third goes down 50 yards from the burning M10, shot through both legs, crawling now, screaming for help that isn't coming, because nobody in Murphy's command has the tactical stupidity to run 200 yards across open ground under machine gun fire to retrieve 1 wounded man, when that would just create 2 casualties instead of 1. Murphy watches through his binoculars and feels nothing except the cold, tactical calculation that 1 wounded soldier who might survive is better than 1 dead soldier, and 1 medic who definitely won't. This is what 3 weeks of continuous combat does to a person. It strips away the emotional responses and leaves only the arithmetic of survival. The Germans are 300 yards out now, close enough that Murphy can hear their squad leaders shouting orders in German that he doesn't understand except in the universal language of tactical commands that transcend vocabulary. The panzers spread out, 3 taking positions on the left flank, 3 on the right, creating interlocking fields of fire that will massacre Murphy's 19 men the moment they stand up to retreat. Murphy realizes with crystalline clarity that withdrawal is no longer an option, that running now just means dying faster, that the only way his company survives the next 10 minutes is if something stops, or at least delays the German advance long enough for those promised reinforcements to arrive. He looks around for something, anything, that could provide that delay. His eyes land on the burning M10, specifically on the M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun still mounted on the turret ring. The vehicle is on fire, black smoke and orange flames pouring from the engine compartment and crew cabin. The ammunition racks hold maybe 60 90mm shells that could detonate at any second. The fuel tanks are ruptured and burning. Standing on that turret ring means standing on a bomb that's already lit. It also means having access to the single most effective anti-personnel weapon in the American arsenal, a machine gun that fires armor-piercing incendiary rounds at 550 rounds per minute, with effective range out to 1,800 yards. A gun that the Germans call the Devil's Paintbrush, because of the way it sweeps across infantry formations and leaves nothing but red mist and body parts. A gun that Murphy has been trained to use, but has never actually fired in combat, because .50 cals are crew-served weapons mounted on vehicles, not personal weapons carried by infantry officers. But Murphy isn't thinking about training or doctrine or proper employment of support weapons. He's thinking about 19 men who are going to die in the next 5 minutes if somebody doesn't do something impossible right now. He shouts at his nearest sergeant, a tough kid from Detroit named Elmer Brawley, who's been with Company B since North Africa. "Brawley, I'm going to that M10. You get everybody back to the tree line. Move on my signal." Brawley stares at Murphy like he's announced he's going to fly to the moon by flapping his arms. "Lieutenant, that thing is going to blow any second. You'll be killed." Murphy shrugs, a gesture that conveys both acknowledgement of the risk and complete disregard for it. "Maybe, but if I don't, we're all dead for sure. Get ready to move." Murphy doesn't wait for a response. He's already climbing out of the shallow ditch, already running across open ground toward the burning M10 100 yards away. German machine gun fire immediately tracks him, bullets kicking up snow and frozen mud to his left and right, The distinctive crack, crack, crack of MG-42s firing in 6-round bursts at 200 rounds per minute. Murphy runs in a straight line because serpentine movement is slower, and slower means dead. Runs with his head down and his legs pumping, covering 100 yards in maybe 15 seconds that feel like 15 hours. A bullet tears through his left trouser leg without hitting flesh. So close he feels the heat of its passage. Another bullet cracks past his head, close enough that the displacement of air feels like being slapped. He reaches the M10 and throws himself against the hull, using the vehicle's bulk as cover from the direct machine gun fire, gasping for breath in air that's thick with smoke and the chemical stench of burning diesel. The heat from the fire is intense, even on the exterior hull, hot enough that Murphy can feel it through his heavy winter uniform. Touching bare metal without gloves would probably cause third-degree burns in seconds. He holsters his M1 carbine and starts climbing, using handholds designed for crew access, pulling himself up the sloping hull to the turret ring where the M2 Browning sits, mounted on a pintle that allows 360-degree rotation. The heat gets worse as he climbs, becomes almost unbearable when he pulls himself onto the turret ring and sees into the crew compartment through the open hatch. The interior is a nightmare of flames and smoke, impossible to see clearly, but Murphy doesn't need clear vision to know that anyone still inside is long past helping. He positions himself behind the M2, finds the charging handle, pulls it back to chamber a round. The gun is already loaded with a 105-round ammunition belt, military standard for vehicle-mounted weapons. 105 rounds at 550 rounds per minute equals approximately 11 seconds of sustained fire. Then he'll need to reload, which means exposing himself to reach the ammunition lockers that are probably inaccessible inside the burning vehicle, which means he gets 11 seconds of firepower and then becomes an unarmed target standing on a burning tank. Murphy decides to worry about that problem in 11 seconds. He grips the M2's spade grips, feels the butterfly trigger under his thumbs, aims at the nearest concentration of German infantry 200 yards away. The gun sits high enough that Murphy has a clear field of fire over the intervening terrain, can see the advancing Germans clearly, despite the smoke from the burning M10. He estimates 50 soldiers in his immediate sector, all advancing in good order, all about to discover what it feels like to receive sustained fire from a weapon that was specifically designed to destroy light armor and fortified positions. Murphy presses the thumb triggers. The M2 roars to life with a sound that's deeper and more authoritative than any infantry weapon, a hammering mechanical thunder that reverberates across the frozen battlefield. The 50 caliber rounds streak down range at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, armor-piercing incendiary projectiles that were designed to punch through aircraft engines and can do absolutely horrific things to unarmored human bodies. Murphy sees the impacts, sees German soldiers disappear in clouds of snow and blood, sees the formation dissolve as men dive for cover or simply cease to exist under the devastating fire. He traverses the gun left to right, sweeping across the advance, firing in short, controlled bursts, the way he learned to shoot rabbits back in Texas, leading moving targets by instinct and experience rather than formal training. The Germans respond exactly as Murphy hoped they would. They go to ground, seek whatever cover exists in the frozen field, return fire, but from static positions rather than continuing their advance. The forward momentum of the assault stops, which means Murphy has bought time measured in minutes rather than seconds. Minutes for Brawley to get the company back to the tree line. Minutes for the promised reinforcements to move up. Minutes that Murphy purchases at the cost of standing completely exposed on a burning vehicle that could explode any moment. He keeps firing, watching his ammunition counter drop from 105 to 80 to 60, rationing his fire, but not so much that the Germans get brave and start moving again. A German Panzer fires at him, the 75mm shell passing close enough that Murphy feels the shock wave, the round impacting somewhere behind him with a thunderous detonation. He ignores it, keeps firing, because stopping now means dying, and dying means the 19 men of Company B die with him. At 40 rounds remaining, Murphy realizes he can see into the ammunition lockers through gaps in the flames. Realizes there might be more belts accessible if he's willing to reach into a burning tank. Realizes that's exactly what he's going to do, because the alternative is running out of ammunition while still standing on this bomb. He reaches into the flames, feels the heat even through his heavy gloves, grabs a belt of 50 caliber ammunition and drags it out. The canvas belt is smoldering, but intact. He feeds it into the M2, chambers around, keeps shooting. The Germans try to flank him, sending squads left and right to get angles on his position. Murphy tracks them with the M2, kills the flanking attempts before they develop, forces the Germans to stay pinned in their shallow cover 150 yards away. The Panzers keep firing, keep missing, because hitting a man-sized target at 400 yards with a tank gun designed for other tanks is surprisingly difficult, especially when that target is wreathed in smoke and constantly moving behind a vehicle-mounted gun. Murphy's field telephone starts ringing, the sound tinny and distant over the roar of the M2 and the explosions of incoming tank rounds. He ignores it, keeps firing, keeps killing, keeps buying time with bullets and determination, and a complete disregard for the laws of probability that say he should already be dead. The Germans get brave again, try another rush, 50 soldiers standing up and charging across 100 yards of open ground. Murphy meets them with sustained fire, empties an entire belt in one continuous burst, watches men drop in windows and clusters until the charge breaks and the survivors retreat in disorder. At some point, Murphy realizes he's been shot. He doesn't know when it happened, doesn't remember the impact, but there's blood running down his right leg, and his boot is full of something warm and wet. He looks down, sees the wound in his thigh, a bullet that went straight through the meat without hitting bone or major vessels. In another context, this would be a serious injury requiring immediate medical attention. In this context, it's a data point that Murphy catalogues and ignores because he's still standing and still shooting and still alive, which means the wound isn't immediately fatal and therefore not relevant to the current tactical situation. He reaches into the flames again, grabs another ammunition belt, feeds it into the M2. The heat has gotten worse, bad enough that Murphy's gloves are starting to char, bad enough that breathing hurts even outside the immediate flames. He estimates he's been on this burning tank for maybe 30 minutes, which means the 90mm ammunition should have cooked off by now, which means either he's miraculously lucky or the laws of physics have taken a temporary vacation. Either way, he keeps shooting. The German infantry has learned to stay down, but the panzers are still operational and still trying to find the range. An 80mm shell, not from the panzers, but from an anti-tank gun position Murphy hadn't spotted, hits the M10's turret 10 feet from where Murphy is standing. The explosion picks him up and slams him against the gun mount, would have thrown him clear off the vehicle, except he's still gripping the M2's spade grips with both hands. His ears ring with a frequency that makes his vision swim. Blood runs from his nose, probably from the overpressure of the blast. He steadies himself, checks that the M2 is still functional, sees that the tripod mount is bent, but still serviceable. He starts shooting again, because the alternative is climbing down and running and dying halfway back to the tree line. The field telephone is ringing again, more insistent now, and Murphy finally grabs it with his left hand, while keeping his right hand on the M2, still ready to fire. Bravo 6. Paulick's voice comes through, tight with controlled urgency. Murphy, what the hell are you doing? I'm getting reports you're standing on a burning tank destroyer. Get the hell off that thing and withdraw. Murphy watches another German squad try to advance, cuts them down with a 3-second burst. -6. Position still contested. Enemy within 100 yards. If I withdraw now, the line collapses. Over. A pause on the other end, while Paulick processes this information, while he realizes that Murphy isn't expressing an opinion, but stating a tactical fact. Understood. Reinforcements are 10 minutes out. Can you hold? Over. Murphy looks at his ammunition supply, counts 4 more belts visible in the ammunition lockers, calculates how long he can maintain suppressive fire against 200-plus German soldiers and 6 Panzer tanks with 4 belts of 50 caliber ammunition. The math doesn't work. The ammunition won't last 10 minutes if the Germans keep pressing. But Murphy also knows that admitting this accomplishes nothing except maybe giving Paulick information that will convince him to abandon the position, which means Company B fought for 3 weeks and died for nothing. Affirmative 6. 10 minutes. I can hold. Out. He hangs up before Paulick can ask questions or issue orders that Murphy has no intention of following. He goes back to shooting, goes back to the mechanical rhythm of aim, fire, traverse, reload that has kept him alive for the last 40 minutes. A German machine gun finds his range, stitches rounds across the M10's turret, bullets cracking against steel all around Murphy's position. One round hits his left arm, another through and through that hurts like hell but doesn't disable the limb. Murphy returns fire, silences the German position with a sustained burst that chews through the earth berm they were using for cover. The ammunition situation is getting critical. Murphy is down to 2 belts, maybe 200 rounds total, facing an enemy force that should overwhelm his position any moment now, except they don't know he's almost out of ammunition, and they're still scared of the M2 that's been killing them for the last 40 minutes. He makes each burst count, fires only when he has clear targets, makes the Germans think he has unlimited ammunition by never letting up the pressure enough for them to organize another assault. The panzers are getting smarter, using cover, advancing only when they can do so behind terrain features that block Murphy's line of fire. One tank gets within 300 yards, elevates its main gun to fire directly at Murphy's position. Murphy watches the gunner line up the shot, watches the turret traverse, knows this is probably the end, because you can't dodge a 75mm shell, and the M10's burning hull provides exactly 0 protection. He keeps shooting anyway, sending rounds bouncing off the Panzer's frontal armor, because at this point, what else is he going to do? The German tank fires. The shell passes 3 feet over Murphy's head, close enough that the displacement of air feels like being punched, impacts somewhere behind him, with a sound like industrial machinery eating itself. Murphy thinks he might have just used up all his luck for the entire war in that single moment. Movement on the left flank catches his attention. American infantry, 2 full companies' worth, advancing from the tree line in good order with armor support, M4 Shermans with their 75mm guns already engaging the German panzers. The reinforcements have arrived, not in 10 minutes but right now, exactly when Murphy needs them most. He watches the German assault dissolve as the new American units hit their flank, watches the panzers fall back toward Holtzwihr under concentrated Sherman fire, watches the German infantry break and run because they're professionals who know when a tactical situation has turned hopeless. Murphy keeps shooting until his last ammunition belt runs dry, keeps the pressure on the retreating Germans because letting up now means some of them escape to fight again tomorrow. When the M2 finally clicks empty, he hangs the field telephone back on its handset and just stands there for a moment, swaying slightly, realizing that he's been shot multiple times, burned in several places, concussed at least twice, and standing on a vehicle that should have exploded approximately 35 minutes ago, but didn't for reasons that Murphy doesn't understand and doesn't question, because he's alive, and his men are alive, and the position held. He climbs down from the burning M10 carefully, his wounded leg nearly buckling under his weight. The ground feels strange under his feet, too solid after 45 minutes of standing on unstable, burning metal. He starts walking toward the tree line, toward Company B's position, where Brawley and the other 18 survivors are presumably waiting. He makes it maybe 50 yards before his leg gives out completely, and he goes down in the snow. Medics arrive approximately 90 seconds later, 2 corpsmen who look at Murphy's wounds and each other with expressions that suggest they're not quite sure where to start. Murphy waves them off, tries to stand up, can't. Check the other guys first. I'm fine. One of the medics, a kid from Tennessee with a thick accent, laughs without humor. "Lieutenant, with respect, you are definitely not fine. You've been shot at least twice, maybe 3 times. You've got burns on both hands, and I think you might have a concussion. You need a hospital." Murphy shakes his head, which makes his vision swim in ways that support the concussion diagnosis. "The position held?" The medic nods. "Yes, sir. Position held. Germans withdrew. You did it." Murphy allows himself to be loaded onto a stretcher, allows the medics to start working on his wounds. Good. That's good. He passes out somewhere between the battlefield and the aid station. Exhaustion and blood loss, and accumulated shock, finally overwhelming the adrenaline that's been keeping him functional. He won't remember the evacuation, or the initial medical treatment, or the first 12 hours in the field hospital. What he will remember later is the sound of the M2 Browning firing, that deep mechanical thunder that saved 19 men and held a position that should have fallen. He'll remember the heat of the flames and the cold of the January air, and the way German soldiers looked through his field glasses, human beings that he killed not from hatred, but from necessity, because they were there, and his men were here, and someone had to survive, and Murphy decided it would be his side. He'll remember climbing onto that burning tank destroyer, and thinking that he was probably going to die, but deciding to do it anyway, because the alternative was watching 19 men die while doing nothing. These are the memories that will follow Audie Murphy for the rest of his life. The images that will wake him at 3 a.m. for decades after the war ends. The experiences that will make him advocate publicly for PTSD treatment and recognition of combat stress long before it becomes acceptable to discuss such things. But that's all later. Right now, on January 26, 1945, at approximately 1500 hours near Holtzwihr, France, Second Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy has just completed an action that will be described in his Medal of Honor citation as conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. He's killed approximately 50 German soldiers, wounded dozens more, destroyed 3 machine gun positions, held off 6 panzer tanks and 250 enemy infantry for 1 hour, while standing on a burning vehicle that could have exploded any second. He's done this with a weapon he was never formally trained to use, in a tactical situation that no manual covers, using skills developed hunting rabbits in Texas to kill enemy soldiers in France. He's 19 years old, weighs 112 pounds, and has just secured his place as the most decorated American combat soldier in World War II. But all Murphy knows right now, lying on a stretcher being carried toward a field hospital, is that Company B held. The line held. His men lived. That's enough. It has to be enough. Because the war isn't over yet, and somewhere up ahead there are more frozen fields and more German soldiers and more impossible tactical situations that will require ordinary men to do extraordinary things. Murphy has just demonstrated exactly what that looks like, exactly what it costs, exactly what American infantry soldiers are capable of when pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance and beyond. The burning M10 tank destroyer finally explodes approximately 15 minutes after Murphy climbs down, the 90mm ammunition cooking off in a series of detonations that send the turret cartwheeling 200 feet through the air. Witnesses will later remark on the timing, on the fact that the vehicle held together just long enough for Murphy to complete his stand, as if physics and probability and random chance all conspired to give one Texas farm boy exactly enough time to become a legend. But physics doesn't care about narrative. The laws of thermodynamics don't give heroic last-minute reprieves. What happened on that frozen field near Holtzwihr was the result of human determination, tactical calculation, and a willingness to accept risk that most people would classify as suicidal. Murphy climbed onto that burning tank because he made a cold assessment that his death was probable, but failure was certain, and chose the option that gave his men the best chance of survival. That's not Hollywood heroism or patriotic mythology. That's just math performed under fire by a 19-year-old who understood that sometimes the equation requires someone to stand in the middle of the blast radius and start shooting. Audie Murphy wakes up in the 36th Evacuation Hospital 3 miles behind the front lines at 0430 hours on January 27, 1945, approximately 14 hours after climbing off the burning M10. His first coherent thought is that his leg hurts like someone is driving railroad spikes through the bone, which makes sense given that he has a bullet wound that went clean through his right thigh and nicked the femoral artery on its way out. The surgeons spent 2 hours stitching blood vessels and muscle tissue back together, pumped him full of plasma and morphine and penicillin, the miracle drug that's saving soldiers who would have died from infected wounds in every previous war in human history. His second coherent thought is that he needs to get back to Company B, back to his 19 men who held that position and who are probably still up there in the Bois de Riedweir forest, digging frozen foxholes and waiting for the next German counterattack. The nurse who catches him trying to climb out of bed is a first lieutenant from Minnesota, tough as boot leather, who physically wrestles Murphy back onto the mattress despite his protests. "Lieutenant Murphy, you have been shot 3 times. You have second-degree burns on both hands, you have a concussion, and you've lost approximately 2 pints of blood. You are going nowhere except back to sleep." Murphy tries to argue, manages to get approximately 4 words out before the nurse jabs him with another morphine injection that sends him back under. He stays in the evacuation hospital for 6 days, which is 5 days longer than he wants and 1 day less than the doctors recommend. By February 2nd, Murphy is ambulatory, if not exactly healthy, walking with a cane and a pronounced limp that the doctors say will probably be permanent, but turns out not to be, because Murphy is too stubborn to accept permanent limitations. He bullies his way onto a supply truck, heading back to 1st Battalion headquarters, shows up at Lieutenant Colonel Paulick's command post, looking like a walking casualty report, and requests immediate return to duty. Paulick takes one look at Murphy's limp, his bandaged hands, the way he's still favoring his wounded leg, and tells him to sit down before he falls down. "Murphy, you just earned a Medal of Honor. You've got 3 Purple Hearts. You could go home if you wanted. Honorable discharge. Nobody would blame you. Why the hell are you here instead of on a hospital ship to the States?" Murphy shrugs, a gesture that's becoming his default response to questions he doesn't want to answer. "Company B needs a commander. I'm Company B's commander. Where else would I be?" Paulick recognizes the futility of arguing with this particular brand of stubborn determination. He signs the return-to-duty papers, sends Murphy back to the remnants of Company B with strict orders to take it easy, which everyone, including Murphy, knows is meaningless, because taking it easy in active combat operations is not actually possible. Murphy rejoins his men on February 4th, finds that Company B now has 47 effectives after receiving replacements, 28 new faces who've heard about Holtzwihr through the inevitable soldier rumor mill, and who look at Murphy with expressions mixing respect and something close to awe. Murphy hates it, hates being looked at like some kind of hero instead of just a guy who did what needed doing because nobody else was in position to do it. He gathers the company for a brief address that basically amounts to, "We have a job to do, forget about everything else, maintain spacing, check your fields of fire, don't bunch up under artillery fire." The replacements were expecting some kind of inspirational speech about courage and valor. Instead, they get practical infantry tactics delivered in Murphy's flat Texas drawl. It's exactly what they need to hear. The war continues its grinding advance through eastern France. The Colmar Pocket, the last German toehold west of the Rhine River, is being systematically reduced through a series of brutal winter battles that gain yards measured against casualties measured in hundreds. Company B fights its way through villages with names that Murphy will remember for the rest of his life: Riedweir, Holtzwihr, Bischheim, Kunheim. Each village is a miniature Stalingrad, house to house, fighting against German defenders who know they're fighting a delaying action but do it anyway with professional competence and occasional desperate fanaticism. Murphy's tactical approach remains consistent. Use overwhelming firepower, minimize American casualties, take calculated risks, but never stupid ones. He leads from the front, not because he's trying to be heroic, but because that's where you need to be, to make good tactical decisions in real time. You can't command infantry effectively from 500 yards back with a radio and a map. You have to see the ground, see the enemy positions, see where your men are struggling and where they're succeeding. Murphy sees all of it, processes it with the same instinctive calculation he used hunting rabbits in Texas, makes decisions that usually work and sometimes don't, but are always made from first-hand observation rather than theoretical doctrine. On February 18th, Company B takes a village called Holtzwihr against light resistance, sets up defensive positions, and gets hit by a German counterattack at dawn the next morning. This time, it's not panzers and mountain troops, but a scratch force of Volksgrenadiers, teenage conscripts, and old men who've been handed rifles and told to recapture ground that Germany can't afford to lose, but can't effectively defend. Murphy watches them come across 300 yards of open ground in ragged formations with terrible tactical spacing, kids who've had maybe 6 weeks of training trying to act like soldiers because their country is collapsing and someone has to try to hold it together. He calls in artillery, watches the fire missions shred the German assault before it gets within rifle range, watches boys die because their commanders sent them into a tactically impossible situation. Later that night, in his company commander's log, Murphy will write a single sentence about the engagement. Repelled enemy attack, estimated 40 hostiles KIA, no friendly casualties. The sentence doesn't capture what it feels like to kill teenagers who never had a chance, doesn't address the moral calculation of doing terrible things in service of a righteous cause. Murphy doesn't talk about those things, not in official reports, and not in private conversation. He just files the memory away with all the other memories, the accumulating psychological weight that he's learning to carry the same way he carries his equipment and his weapon. March 2nd, 1945. Company B is assigned to take a strategic crossroads near a town called Drusenheim. Intelligence says it's lightly defended. Intelligence is wrong, which is becoming a pattern. Company B walks into a carefully prepared ambush, takes fire from 3 directions simultaneously, loses 6 men in the first 30 seconds. Murphy finds himself pinned down behind a knocked-out Sherman tank with no good options and a tactical situation that's deteriorating rapidly. He spots the German position that's doing the most damage, a machine gun nest in a farmhouse 150 yards away that has perfect enfilade fire across the approach Murphy's platoon needs to use. The conventional solution is to call in artillery or armor support, wait for the supporting fire to suppress the position, then advance under covering fire. Murphy doesn't have time for conventional solutions because his men are dying right now, and waiting means more dead Americans. He tells his platoon sergeant to get the men ready to move on his signal, then stands up and charges the farmhouse alone, firing his M1 carbine from the hip as he runs, drawing all the German fire onto himself and away from his platoon. It's tactically insane, and it works, which seems to be Murphy's particular combat specialty. The Germans concentrate their fire on the single charging American, which means they're not firing at the platoon that's now moving up behind Murphy's sprint. Murphy makes it to the farmhouse, kicks in the door, empties his carbine into the interior, kills 2 German soldiers, and wounds a third who's trying to surrender. Murphy accepts the surrender, secures the prisoner with the casual efficiency of someone who's done this before, signals his platoon to advance. The crossroads is secured within 20 minutes. Cost: 6 American KIA, 11 wounded, Murphy completely unscathed, despite charging a machine gun nest across open ground. His platoon sergeant, a veteran from the North Africa campaign, pulls Murphy aside after the engagement and asks him if he's trying to get himself killed. Murphy considers the question seriously, gives an honest answer. No, but I'm trying to get us through this alive, and sometimes that means taking risks that look crazy to anyone who's not seeing what I'm seeing. The platoon sergeant doesn't have a response to that, because it's objectively true that Murphy's crazy tactics have kept Company B's casualty rate lower than most other line companies in the battalion. By mid-March 1945, Germany is collapsing on all fronts. The Western Allies have crossed the Rhine. The Soviets are closing on Berlin from the east. The war has maybe 6 weeks left, though nobody knows that yet. What they know is that the Germans are still fighting, still defending every yard, still dangerous even in defeat. Company B continues its advance through southern Germany, taking villages and road junctions and river crossings against increasingly sporadic resistance. Murphy's combat record at this point reads like something from an adventure novel that nobody would believe if it weren't meticulously documented in after-action reports and witness statements. 240 German soldiers killed or wounded by his direct action, 3 tanks destroyed, multiple machine gun nests eliminated, countless successful combat patrols, 0 failures to accomplish assigned mission. He's been wounded 3 times, exposed himself to enemy fire dozens of times, made tactical decisions under conditions that would paralyze most officers. He's done all of this while remaining the quiet kid from Texas, who doesn't talk much and doesn't seek attention and just wants to do his job and get through this war. April 23, 1945, Murphy receives official notification that he's been awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions at Holtzwihr on January 26th. The notification comes from division headquarters via courier, a formal typed letter that informs Lieutenant Murphy that he has been awarded the nation's highest military decoration for valor above and beyond the call of duty. Murphy reads the citation, folds the letter carefully, puts it in his pack, and goes back to preparing Company B for the next day's advance. He doesn't make an announcement, doesn't celebrate, doesn't treat it as anything special. One of his sergeants finds out about the Medal of Honor from a division courier who's talking to other soldiers, asks Murphy why he didn't mention it. Murphy's response, "It's a piece of paper that says I did my job. Doesn't change anything about tomorrow's mission. But it does change things, in ways Murphy doesn't fully understand yet." The Medal of Honor transforms him from an effective combat officer into a national symbol, a face that represents American military valor, a story that newspapers and magazines will use to sell the war effort to civilians who need heroes to believe in. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The war ends with German unconditional surrender. Murphy is in a small village in southern Germany when the news comes through, surrounded by Company B survivors who've made it from North Africa, through Sicily, through Italy, through France, through Germany, to this moment. The celebration is subdued, men drinking captured German schnapps and processing the reality that they survived when so many others didn't. Murphy sits apart from the celebration, alone with his thoughts about the 128 men who started this campaign with Company B and the 47 who finished it, about the villages he fought through and the soldiers he killed and the friends he lost. Someone asks him how he feels about the war being over. Murphy's answer, relieved, tired, ready to go home. He's 20 years old. He's been in combat for nearly 3 years. He's killed 240 enemy soldiers with his own hands. He's been wounded 3 times, awarded 33 medals and decorations from the United States and Allied nations, earned a battlefield commission from private to first lieutenant. He's done and seen things that most people can't imagine, and that Murphy himself will spend the rest of his life trying to forget. The journey home starts in June 1945, a slow process of demobilization and transport across an Atlantic Ocean that's no longer filled with U-boats. Murphy arrives in New York Harbor to a hero's welcome, ticker tape parades and newspaper interviews, and politicians wanting to shake his hand for photographs. He hates every minute of it. hates being put on display, hates the questions about what it felt like to kill people and whether he was scared, and how did he find the courage to climb that burning tank destroyer. He gives polite answers that don't actually say anything real, deflects attention to other soldiers who didn't come home, endures the publicity with the same stoic determination he endured combat. James Cagney, the famous actor, sees Murphy's picture on the cover of Life magazine, sees something in that baby-faced war hero that suggests movie potential. Cagney invites Murphy to Hollywood, offers to help him break into the film industry. Murphy accepts because he needs to do something with his life, and he's not qualified for anything except infantry combat, which isn't a civilian profession. The transition to civilian life is harder than Murphy expected, harder than combat in some ways, because at least combat has clear rules and obvious objectives. Civilian life is ambiguous and confusing, and full of people who don't understand what Murphy has experienced and can't relate to the weight he carries. The nightmares start almost immediately. Murphy has trouble sleeping, wakes up at 3 a.m. convinced he's back in France or Germany or Italy, reaches for weapons that aren't there, struggles to separate memory from present reality. The medical term for what Murphy is experiencing won't be invented for decades. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, combat stress reaction. In 1945, they call it shell shock or combat fatigue, and treat it as a character flaw or weakness, rather than a legitimate medical condition. Murphy doesn't talk about the nightmares, doesn't seek treatment, just tries to manage it through force of will, the same way he managed everything else in his life. He starts sleeping with a loaded .45 under his pillow, which his first wife, Wanda Hendricks, discovers and finds terrifying. Murphy tries to explain that he feels safer with a weapon accessible, that some part of his brain is still in combat mode and needs the security of knowing he can defend himself. The marriage doesn't last, ends in divorce after 2 years, another casualty of Murphy's inability to fully leave the war behind. His acting career develops slowly at first, bit parts and minor roles that don't really use his talent, until To Hell and Back in 1955, the film adaptation of his autobiography, where Murphy plays himself and has to relive many of the experiences he's been trying to forget. The movie is a massive commercial success, Universal Studios' biggest hit until Jaws 20 years later, and it cements Murphy's place in American popular culture as the embodiment of the citizen soldier hero. But the success comes at a cost. Playing himself, reenacting battles he actually fought, forces Murphy to confront memories he's been suppressing. The scene where he climbs the burning tank destroyer has to be shot multiple times, and each take brings Murphy closer to a psychological breaking point that he somehow manages to avoid through sheer willpower. His co-stars and director notice that Murphy becomes distant and withdrawn when filming combat scenes, see him shaking between takes, recognize that something is deeply wrong, but don't know how to address it because this is 1955 and mental health is not something people discuss openly. Murphy finishes the film, does the promotional tour, continues his acting career with roles in 44 feature films over the next 16 years. He becomes a successful country music songwriter, penning hits for major artists. He maintains his connection to the military, joining the Texas National Guard in 1950 and serving until 1966. He becomes wealthy through his film work and music royalties, uses some of that wealth to support veteran causes and advocate for better treatment of combat veterans with psychological trauma. In the mid-1960s, Murphy starts speaking publicly about his struggles with what would later be recognized as PTSD. He testifies before Congress about the need for increased funding for veterans' mental health services. He writes articles for magazines describing his nightmares, his difficulty adjusting to civilian life, the way combat experiences continue to haunt him decades after the war ended. This is revolutionary at the time, a Medal of Honor recipient admitting that he struggles with psychological consequences of combat, that bravery in battle doesn't translate to immunity from trauma. Murphy's public advocacy helps begin changing attitudes toward combat stress, helps create space for other veterans to seek treatment without stigma. It's perhaps his greatest contribution beyond his combat service, using his celebrity and credibility to advocate for soldiers who can't advocate for themselves. But the advocacy comes from lived experience, from personal pain that Murphy manages but never entirely overcomes. He struggles with insomnia for his entire adult life, only sleeping well when he's armed or in the presence of other veterans who understand the hypervigilance that never quite goes away. He has trouble maintaining relationships, goes through multiple marriages and business partnerships that fail because Murphy can't fully trust or connect with people who haven't shared his experiences. The financial success Murphy enjoyed in the 1950s evaporates by the late 1960s through a combination of bad investments, gambling debts, and generosity toward friends and fellow veterans that leaves him nearly bankrupt. By 1970, Murphy is working to rebuild his finances, taking acting roles he would have refused a decade earlier, developing real estate projects, trying to maintain the lifestyle his family has grown accustomed to. On May 28, 1971, Murphy boards a private Aero Commander 680 aircraft in Atlanta, bound for Martinsville, Virginia, on a business trip related to a real estate investment. The weather is terrible, heavy fog and rain, conditions that should have grounded the flight but didn't. At 5:38 p.m., the aircraft crashes into Brush Mountain near Catawba, Virginia, killing all 6 people aboard, including Murphy. He's 45 years old, barely old enough to receive his AARP card, a man who survived 3 years of combat and 26 years of peacetime trauma, only to die in a plane crash on a Virginia mountainside. The body is recovered on Memorial Day, May 31st, which seems grimly appropriate for a man whose entire adult identity was shaped by military service and sacrifice. Murphy's funeral at Arlington National Cemetery on June 7, 1971, draws thousands of mourners, veterans who served with him, actors who worked with him, politicians who courted his endorsement, civilians who knew him only as a symbol, but came to pay respects anyway. He's buried with full military honors in Section 46, Grave 36611, a spot chosen not for prominence, but for availability, because Murphy specifically requested that he not receive special treatment even in death. His grave becomes the second most visited site at Arlington after President Kennedy's, a pilgrimage destination for veterans and military history enthusiasts who want to pay respects to the man who embodied American military valor in World War II. The Medal of Honor citation, hanging in the memorial near his grave, reads in part, "Lieutenant Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Lieutenant Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions in a woods, while he remained forward at his command post and continued to give fire directions to the artillery by telephone. With the enemy tanks abreast of his position, 2D Lieutenant Murphy climbed on the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its 50 caliber machine gun against the enemy." The citation continues for 2 more paragraphs, describing an hour of combat condensed into bureaucratic military language that fails to capture the reality of what Murphy experienced on that frozen field near Holtzwihr. It mentions that he killed approximately 50 enemy soldiers, wounded many more, held his position despite being wounded, and despite the very real possibility of the M10 exploding under him. What it doesn't mention is the cold, the smell of burning diesel, the way German soldiers looked when 50 caliber rounds hit them, the calculation Murphy made that his life was an acceptable price for saving his men. The citation doesn't mention the nightmares Murphy had for 26 years after that day, the way he slept with a gun under his pillow, the marriages that failed, and the relationships that couldn't survive the weight of his experiences. It doesn't mention the advocacy work Murphy did for veteran mental health, the way he used his celebrity to change attitudes toward combat stress. It doesn't mention any of the complex reality of being Audie Murphy, only the simplified heroic narrative that makes good copy for military decorations and magazine profiles. The legacy Murphy left extends far beyond his combat record or his film career. His willingness to speak publicly about psychological trauma from combat helped create space for generations of veterans to seek treatment without stigma. The Veterans Administration Hospital in San Antonio, renamed the Audie L. Murphy Memorial Veterans Hospital in 1973, provides treatment specifically for combat-related PTSD, using approaches that Murphy advocated before his death. His autobiography, To Hell and Back, remains in print 80 years after publication, required reading in many military leadership courses as an example of effective small unit tactics and ethical decision-making under pressure. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun he used at Holtzwihr remains in service with the US military today, essentially unchanged from the 1945 model, a testament to John Browning's design genius and to the weapon's effectiveness in Murphy's hands. The tactical lessons from Holtzwihr, aggressive use of supporting weapons, personal example under fire, acceptance of calculated risk, are still taught at infantry officer courses and NCO academies. Murphy's approach to combat leadership, his focus on completing the mission while minimizing friendly casualties, his willingness to expose himself to danger rather than order subordinates into situations he wouldn't enter himself, represents a model that military organizations aspire to, even when they don't always achieve it. But perhaps Murphy's most important legacy is simply the example he set of an ordinary person doing extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. He wasn't a professional soldier before the war, wasn't from a military family, hadn't attended West Point or received elite training. He was a poor farm kid from Texas who got drafted, discovered he had a talent for combat leadership, and used that talent to save lives and accomplish missions. He didn't seek glory or recognition, didn't lobby for medals or promotions, just did his job day after day, even when that job involved standing on burning vehicles and shooting at people who were trying to kill him. After the war, he struggled with the same challenges many veterans face, adjusting to civilian life, dealing with trauma, finding purpose outside of military service. He succeeded in some areas, failed in others, remained fundamentally human despite being treated as a symbol and icon. That humanity, that acknowledgement of struggle and imperfection, even in a bona fide American hero, might be the most valuable lesson Murphy left behind. Heroes aren't invulnerable supermen who feel no fear and suffer no consequences. Heroes are ordinary people who act despite fear, who do difficult things because they need doing, who carry the weight of their experiences and still manage to function and contribute and advocate for others. On January 26th every year, veterans groups and military history organizations hold commemorations of Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr. A monument stands near the site where the burning M10 sat, a stone marker with a bronze plaque describing the action in both French and English. Local French citizens maintain the monument, place flowers on significant dates, teach their children about the American lieutenant who fought on their soil. In Farmersville, Texas, the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum preserves artifacts from Murphy's life, including his Medal of Honor and other decorations, his film memorabilia, personal effects that tell the story of a boy who picked cotton for $1 a day and became the most decorated American soldier in World War II. In Kingston, Texas, the house where Murphy was born is long gone, torn down or collapsed decades ago, but a historical marker stands at the site commemorating his birthplace. These physical memorials serve their purpose, keeping Murphy's story alive for generations who didn't experience World War II firsthand. But the real memorial to Audie Murphy exists in the thousands of veterans who've sought treatment for PTSD because Murphy made it acceptable to admit you're struggling, in the infantry officers who study his tactics and try to emulate his leadership style, in the understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. The 50 caliber Browning M2 that Murphy used at Holtzwihr, the specific weapon, serial number unknown, but mounted on M10 tank destroyer that was destroyed in the fire, no longer exists. It was consumed in the explosion when the vehicle's ammunition cooked off, reduced to scrap metal that was probably salvaged and melted down and reformed into some other piece of military equipment. But thousands of other M2 Brownings remain in service, on vehicles and in fortifications and on ships, still serving the same purpose they served in Murphy's hands, providing overwhelming firepower that saves American lives and destroys enemy threats. Every 50 cal gunner in the US military inherits a lineage that includes Audie Murphy standing on a burning tank destroyer and making that weapon do things its designers never imagined, demonstrating that in the hands of a skilled and determined operator, a machine gun becomes something more than just hardware and ammunition. It becomes the difference between life and death, victory and defeat, holding a position and losing it. Murphy understood this instinctively, understood that weapons are tools that amplify human will and determination, that the 50 caliber Browning was only effective because Murphy was willing to stand behind it under circumstances that should have killed him. The numbers tell part of the story. 240 German soldiers killed or wounded by Murphy's direct action over his combat career, 50 of them at Holtzwihr alone. Approximately 19 American soldiers whose lives were saved because Murphy held that position long enough for reinforcements to arrive. 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat, the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor Device, 33 total awards and decorations from the United States and Allied nations. Numbers that quantify Murphy's combat effectiveness, that measure his contribution to the American war effort in a way military bureaucracies can process and record. But numbers can't capture what it felt like to climb onto that burning M10, can't measure the determination required to keep shooting when every rational calculation says you should already be dead, can't quantify the weight Murphy carried for the rest of his life from the experiences he had between 1942 and 1945. The real story of Audie Murphy isn't in the citation or the after-action reports or the Hollywood films. It's in the moment-by-moment decisions he made under fire, the calculations of risk versus mission versus men, the willingness to accept personal danger rather than order others into situations he wouldn't face himself. January 26, 1945, remains the defining moment of Murphy's life, the hour that earned him the Medal of Honor and secured his place in American military history. But it was just one day in a combat career that spanned nearly 3 years, just one action among dozens where Murphy demonstrated the same qualities of courage and tactical competence and self-sacrifice. What made Holtzwihr special wasn't that Murphy was braver there than in other engagements. He was consistently brave throughout his service. What made it special was the visibility of the action, the dramatic imagery of a young officer standing alone on a burning vehicle, fighting off overwhelming enemy forces, the clear-cut narrative of heroism that could be easily communicated and understood. Other actions Murphy participated in were tactically more complex or strategically more important, but none of them had the same visceral impact as that hour on the burning M10. That's what creates lasting military legends. Not necessarily the most important actions, but the most visually compelling ones. The stories that can be told and retold without losing their power. The moments that become symbols of larger truths about courage and sacrifice and determination. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr became that kind of symbol, a story that represents every American infantryman who ever faced impossible odds and decided to stand and fight anyway. The final accounting is this. Audie Murphy was born into poverty on June 20th, 1925, in Hunt County, Texas. He dropped out of school in 5th grade to help support his family. He lied about his age to enlist in the army on June 30th, 1942, shortly after his mother's death. He fought in 9 major campaigns across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. He earned a battlefield commission from private to second lieutenant based on combat performance. He killed 240 enemy soldiers, wounded and captured many more, completed every assigned mission, never failed to hold a position he was ordered to defend. He was wounded 3 times, survived circumstances that killed or maimed thousands of other soldiers, demonstrated courage and tactical brilliance that earned him more decorations than any other American combat soldier in World War II. After the war, he struggled with trauma, achieved success as an actor and songwriter, advocated for veteran mental health treatment, and died in a plane crash at age 45. He left behind a legacy that includes not just his combat record, but his humanity, his willingness to admit struggle and imperfection, his demonstration that heroism comes with a cost that extends far beyond the battlefield. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, where his grave remains one of the most visited sites in the cemetery, a pilgrimage destination for those who understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That is the story of Audie Murphy and the burning M10 tank destroyer at Holtzwihr. That is the story of what one determined young man with a .50 caliber machine gun can accomplish when the mission requires it and alternatives don't exist. That is the story of how ordinary people become extraordinary through circumstance and choice and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The story doesn't end with Murphy's death in 1971, or with the fading of his films from popular culture, or with the passing of the generation that fought World War II. It continues in every military leader who studies Murphy's tactics, every veteran who seeks treatment for combat trauma because Murphy made it acceptable to do so, every person who understands that real heroism is complicated and costly and worth honoring, not despite its complexity, but because of it. Audie Murphy stood on a burning tank destroyer for 1 hour on a frozen field in France and changed the course of a battle. But the stand he took afterward, the public advocacy, the honest discussion of trauma, the demonstration that heroes are human, might be even more valuable than that hour of combat. Both legacies endure, both matter, both represent the best of what American military service can produce. Warriors who fight effectively and ethically, and citizens who continue serving even after the guns fall silent. If you understand that behind every word hero stands a broken psyche, sleepless nights, and a very specific price, write about it in the comments. Stories like this shouldn't drown in algorithms, so your like and subscription actually matter here.